economy. Now, on the exam, they're going to ask you several questions as it relates to the economy and how economic activity is influenced by government policy. And that's what we're going to explore here. First, the GDP, gross domestic product. This measures the economic output of the United States. This measures goods and services produced in the United States. Consumer Price Index, CPI. This is a measure of inflation. It's also a measure of deflation. Now, inflation, is that good or bad? It depends. Mild inflation would indicate a healthy, growing economy, and that would be good. But high inflation would not be good. If the cost of goods and services are going up too quickly, higher than income, people will not be able to buy those goods and services at the higher price. Therefore, the economy will begin to slow. So mild inflation is good. That is an indicator of a growing, healthy economy. High inflation is bad. That would be an indicator of an economy that is about to slow down. Deflation. Now that is where we see the price of goods and services falling. Most people would think that's a good thing. That's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. When would the price of goods and services fall? When no one wants to buy those goods and services, and that would indicate a slowing economy. That would indicate a slowing economy. We might see stagnation. Now, stagnation would be representative of a slow or little growth in the economy with high unemployment. Not good. And stagflation, very unusual, would be high inflation with high unemployment. Typically, high unemployment is an indicator of a slowing economy, of a deflating economy. So this is very unusual to find inflation, cost of goods and services going up, but with high unemployment. Period that I can think when this occurred was back in the late 70s and early 80s. A lot of you folks weren't around back then like I was. Economic cycles. Now, we've lived through these economic cycles before. You know what these are. There are periods of time that our economy will expand. Our economy is inflating. Now, this is represented by a positive GDP. Now, at some point, our economy reaches a peak. And after the peak, our economy begins to contract. Our economy begins to deflate. Now, a contracting economy, a deflating economy, is represented by a negative GDP, a declining GDP. If GDP declines for 2 consecutive quarters, that would be 6 months, that would be a recession. That would indicate a recession. If the GDP were to be negative for 6 consecutive quarters, that would be a depression. Now, at some point, the economy will stop contracting, will enter a trough area, flatten out in a trough area, and then recovery begins. Expansion would start once again. And government economic policy can influence these economic cycles, and we'll talk about that later. Now, there are economic indicators. There are indicators that will tell us where the economy is heading. These are leading indicators. Leading indicators would be money supply as measured by M2. Now, what is M2? Well, let's talk about money supply in general. There are three measurements of money supply: M1, M2, and M3. M1 would be our demand deposits. Checking accounts. Money in checking accounts would represent M1. M2 is represented by M1, demand deposits, money in checking accounts, plus time deposits. Time deposits would be money in savings accounts. Now, money in savings accounts that would be less than $100,000 would be represented by M2. M2 is also represented by repos, repurchase agreements. We'll see those later, which are short-term. They're overnight repos. So that makes up M2. M1 plus time deposits plus overnight repos. What makes up M3? M3 is M2 plus deposits of over $100,000. Would also include repos that are longer term than overnight. So those are your three different money supplies, M1, M2, and M3. What makes up each? Now the one that is the leading indicator is M2. So we would expect to see money supply beginning to grow before the economy expands. We would expect to see money supply contracting or getting smaller before the economy slows. Leading indicator. Building permits, housing starts would be a leading indicator. Housing starts, leading indicator. So if we see that the number of building permits being issued, the number of housing starts is going up, that would indicate to us that the economy is about to expand. But if we see that the number of building permits being issued, the number of housing starts are contracting or going down, that's a leading indicator. That tells us that the economy is about to slow. Initial claims for unemployment. Initial claims for unemployment. Leading indicator. If we see initial claims for unemployment on the rise, that would indicate that the economy is about to slow down. If we see initial claims for unemployment declining, that means that the economy is about to expand. So employers start laying people off before the economy slows. They stop laying people off before the economy expands. Average work week in manufacturing is a leading indicator. Inventory of durable goods is a leading indicator. What are durable goods? Well, things that last a long time. Automobiles, washing machines, dryers. Inventory of durable goods would be a leading indicator. And the last leading indicator would be stock prices as measured by the S&P 500. So let's say that we've been in a period of economic expansion for a while. And all of a sudden, we see that stock prices, the S&P 500 stock index, begins to fall in value. Now, 1 or 2 days, no big deal, but if we see this decline the economy is about to begin contracting. Coincident indicators. These correlate to economic activity. These correlate to economic activity. When would we expect to see unemployment levels being low? During an expanding economy. When would we expect to see unemployment levels being high? During a period of a contracting economy. So, coincident indicators. Personal income is a coincident indicator. When would we see personal income rising? As the economy expands. When would we see personal income falling? When the economy slows. Industrial production is a coincident indicator. We see production high during a growing economy. Got to produce the goods that people are buying during a growing economy. We see industrial production low during a slowing economy. We don't need to produce as many General Motors cars as the economy slows. People aren't buying the cars. We don't need to produce them. Coincident indicators. And finally, the GDP is a coincident indicator as well, which really makes sense. The GDP would be a coincident indicator. We would expect to see the GDP rising as the economy expands, GDP declining as the economy slows. Lagging economic indicators. There are two here we're going to look at. Corporate profits is a lagging indicator. Duration of unemployment is a lagging indicator. Corporate profits lag behind corporate sales, lag behind sales. It takes a while for the money to make its way through the corporate process to show up on the corporate books as profits. So economic activity has already begun to grow. The economy has already begun to expand. Companies are already beginning to sell goods and services before corporate profits are affected, because it takes a while for that activity to reflect in the profits to the corporation. Lagging indicator, of course, in a falling economy, the same thing would be true. Profits would start falling after the economy has slowed. Now, duration of unemployment is a lagging indicator. Don't get this confused. Please do not get this confused with initial claims for unemployment. Initial claims for unemployment would be a leading indicator. Duration of unemployment is a lagging indicator. Companies stop laying people off before the economy grows. They stop laying people off before the economy grows, but they do not hire people back until the economy has already begun to expand. So duration of unemployment is a lagging indicator. We would not see the duration of unemployment begin to shrink or be reduced until after the economy has begun growing. Now, there are different types of industries that we would like to look at. The first industry would be the cyclical industry. An example would be durable goods. I mentioned this earlier. Cars, washing machines, refrigerators, heavy machinery. Now, these are industries that do well in good economic times. They do not do well in bad economic times. When are people buying new cars? As the economy expands. When are people buying new washing machines and dryers? As the economy expands. When would a construction company go out and buy a new bulldozer? When the economy expands. So these are cyclical industries. When would people not buy the new car? They would fix up the old car when the economy is contracting. When would the construction company not buy the new tractor? When the economy is contracting. So these companies do well in good economic times. They don't do well in bad economic times. Another industry is the growth industry. These are companies that are growing faster than the economy in general. Computers are a great example of that. Now, these companies, investors buy growth companies for what? For growth. For growth of invested capital. They don't very little or no dividends. Very little or no dividends. If these companies earn money, many don't, but if they do earn money, they take Another industry is the defensive industry. Now, these are companies that do well in good times and in bad. Some examples: tobacco companies, food, pharmaceuticals, utilities. These are considered to be defensive companies. If the economy is doing well and someone uses tobacco products, they're going to use those tobacco products. If the economy is not doing well, they're still going to use those tobacco products. Economy's doing well, we're going to eat. The economy's not doing well, we're going to eat food. The economy's doing well, you're going to take your meds. Economy's not doing well, you're going to take your meds. These companies do well in good times and bad. Utilities, gas companies, electric companies. People use their lights in good times. People use their lights in bad times. These are defensive companies. These companies do well in good times and bad. Now, if I were an investor and the economy's not doing very well, would I want to invest in a cyclical industry, in a company in the cyclical industry? No. In the growth industry? Probably not. No. In the defensive industry? Yeah. In bad economic times, I would invest in the defensive industry. I would invest in companies that are in the defensive industry. I would.